Hi, I'm George the Antique Nomad. Come with me as I wander the country in search of valuable vintage, amazing antiques, and cool collectibles. We'll buy, sell, and trade at antique malls, shops, and shows, estate sales, flea markets, thrift stores, anywhere people go to find really interesting things that just aren't made anymore. So come on, let's go! My name is George Higbee, and I am an antique dealer and appraiser. And like I said, I conduct estate sales. I wrote a book about a pottery company. I have a YouTube channel where I film. That's why I have the camera on today, and it's just on me. You folks don't have to be on camera, but I like to show people the kinds of things that people have collected so that they can learn something from it too. Well, isn't that neat?
1939.
Yes, that's right. New York World's Fair.
Is it worth anything?
Oh, yes, it sure is. By then, Hitler had already invaded a lot of these countries, and a lot of the pavilions ended up having to be closed because the country was no longer able to represent itself. There's a lot of interest in 1939 World's Fair items, and this is very colorful. It has some stains and a little bit of a hole, and that would affect the value.
I'm just going to keep it, that's all.
I think it's really neat. If it were in perfect condition, it would probably sell for about $50 to $60.
Scarf just before the Polish building the lights went out and the war started.
That's right. Oh, very interesting. She's a Royal Dalton balloon lady. This is one of their most famous figures. There's a balloon lady and a balloon man. Yes, I agree, because it has a little number here. In fact, with Royal Dalton, with this little tiny number, their mark doesn't always have that, but starting in 1927, they started putting a number mark, and the number is how many years after 1927 it was made. I like the older ones like this because the hand painting is a little better. It's a little more detailed. You can see it in the fringe of her shawl especially. Subsequently became very, very popular. They started making an awful lot of these, and the later ones are rather common compared to the earlier ones. So the value on her is not what it used to be. When I first was in the business, this might have sold for $250 or more. Nowadays it sells for a little more than half that. It's still a really beautiful piece and very well done, and I'm glad that you brought it because it's nice to be able to show. It's such a good example of their work, and it's one of their most well-known. Well, this is a very pretty lamp, and what do you know about it?
My husband collected Rookwood. I don't have the paper to prove it.
Oh, I believe it. I'm certain that if we took this apart, that it would have a Rookwood mark on the bottom of it, because when I looked at it, I immediately thought that looks like one of Rookwood's artist pieces. It was very popular in the 1920s to make vases into lamps. You have the band with all of the flowers, and then you have smaller flowers below. It just gives it a lot of contrast. The colors are quite rich, and Rookwood is just so well regarded. It doesn't have an artist signature on the outside that we can see. I'm going to presume it's one of their artist signed pieces and that the signature would have been on the bottom. This could easily sell between $1,000 and $1,200 in my opinion. It's a very pretty piece.
I'll give you $500 for
it. You and me both.
We didn't really know what the markings on this represented and what you could tell us about this.
Let's take a look and see. Oh, actually, I think I can tell you something about this because of, you said the markings and you didn't see. Yeah, actually, I can tell you a bunch about this. This is kind of exciting for me to see. Okay, so you notice on the bottom, this is hand blown, so it has a pontil mark where they break the blowpipe. Notice that it has a waffle pattern to it right there. I'm going to hold this up. And then there's an arch with a P in the middle of it. That's that other mark. When I was very new to the business, Pilgrim made a whole lot of other stuff in their West Virginia factory near Huntington. And we opened a factory outlet store for them. And we told them, we really think you should put some sort of a mark on your pieces so that people who buy one will start like Fenton did so we can keep collecting. So at our suggestion, they came up with the arch with the P in about 1990. The waffling was because they didn't fire polish their pontils and they didn't want them to be rough and sloppy like the Blanco pontils were. So they would just take a tool that had left an impression that looked like a waffle and stick it on the bottom to finish. And then they'd put the embossed stamp with the P on it, and it was ready to go. So this is a Pilgrim Glass piece from about 1990. This one was not one that we sold. This wasn't really in their line very long. This is probably a late 80s piece that they continued to make a little bit on special order in the early 90s. I would say the value is probably maybe $45 to $65 right now, depending on the client. Pilgrim isn't as much collected by its name as Blanco or Fenton are, but they had some really great designers, one of whom is now designing for Blanco, so they're starting to be more understanding, and people are starting to catch on to this stuff. And I think that, people keep asking me, what do you buy from the 80s? The 80s are going to be the next generation. People collect, what should I be buying? I think Pilgrim Glass is one of those things. So.
Okay, thank you. That's a gem.
Oh, this is great. This is really great because it's the monkey, and you do not see the monkeys nearly as much as you see the trolls. How did you get this?
Oh my God. Happenstance, we got a lot.
1966 R. Schurter label, and this one is USA. So this one's a little bit surprising in that most of the older ones were made by Thomas Dam and Company in Denmark, but this one is a USA made. The Danish ones with the monkey faces are the most desirable of those. If it was a Thomas Dam piece, it would probably sell in the $150 because they really like these faces. Whether this one is going to be more because it's a more obscure company made in America or the same or less, I don't really know, to be honest, because we just don't see the American-made ones. My inclination would be to think that it might be more, or at least for the first, if you were to sell this, I would go higher because the first person who hasn't seen one is going to say, oh, that's unusual, and they may pay more for it on that basis. And that would be valid because they seem to be rather scarce. Yes.
So it's not
great.
Thomas Dan?
It's not Thomas Dam, D-A-M. Yeah, they would refer to them as Dam Troll Dolls because it was salacious sounding.
Damn troll dolls. Okay.
But it's Schurter is the name, and it is written on this foot here. How did you get this piece?
I cannot divulge my secrets.
That's okay. You don't have to. I just always ask.
It's okay.
This one is cloisonné, and it is marked China on the back. The Japanese and the Chinese both did these, but the Chinese tended to have a more detailed field in the background. So if you see one that doesn't have a mark and you're trying to decide is it Chinese or Japanese, look in the background, and if there's a lot of design, it's Chinese, and if there's not much, it's probably Japanese. This is nationalist China. This is probably 1920s or 30s era. So it actually does have some age. It's almost old enough to be a true antique. It's got a really nice design to it. It doesn't have dents. There's not pieces that are falling off. You know, the way they make these, all of these little pieces here are wire, and then they have to enamel in between all of them. So it was really labor intensive. And so I would say this piece, in the right place, probably 85 to 100. Thank you. Oh, isn't this fun? And look at the colors. I'm happy to share this, and I'm glad that you folks are allowing me to record your items because these are interesting things that people will really enjoy knowing more about. So this tray is from Brazil, and it has a mark on the back that says manufactured Brasileira by Aliwo. So it actually is marked in the lower left. Most of these trays were made in Brazil, and they used mahogany because mahogany to them is just a tree, whereas to us it's an exotic wood. It's really nicely done. It does have some butterfly wing in here. You can see the blue butterfly wings. They did some that were just butterfly wings all over, but this is neat because they've actually used butterfly wings in the corners. And then I believe that in addition to the butterfly wing that repeats throughout this, that you have quite a bit of hand painting on the reverse of the glass as well. These were very popular as tourist souvenirs. They also made jewelry out of the butterfly wings. They made little wall plaques. So there were a lot of things that you could buy. They were mainly made in Brazil, but they were very popular to sell in Florida, especially in the middle 1900s. And this one probably will date to sometime 1930s, 40s, 50s, I would say. It's really a pretty one, and we have a lot of interest in these anyway, but this one is one of the more unusual ones because they've made a flower basket out of it, and this is unusual. It's not the motif. Usually we see a scene of Rio de Janeiro with a palm tree, or some other scene with a palm tree, or it's just butterflies. So yours is a little more special, and because of that, I think in the right hands it might sell for about $125 now. It's very pretty. Now, when I tell you these values, I'm telling you, thank you, I'm telling you what I think a retail price, if you weren't in a rush to sell it, is. There's different prices depending on how you sell things. You know, if you go to an estate sale, they're going to price things less expensively because they have a couple days to sell everything. But if you go to an antique store, they're going to hold out for a little bit more because they're going to be there for a while. So, and then if it's an insurance value, then that's another thing entirely. Your uncle got it for his mother around 1910. Very good. Well, this is a nice piece, and actually it looks to me like it had a little bit of age when he got it. It is Chinese. It's blue and white porcelain. They've got a little bit of the reds in here too because they were seeing a lot of competition from Japan with the Imari ware by then. Let's say it how it really was. The Japanese stole a lot of the Chinese designs, and then when they started making their own versions, the Chinese stole those and made them. So nothing is really new. It's got decoration on the back, which is good. The overall condition seems good. Okay, it has an old repair. This was cracked at one time and resealed, and that's why you see this running around, because it goes all the way the underside. So this was damaged at one point. But this is rather old. This is from Qing Dynasty in China, which is, that's a very broad range of dates. I think it starts in the 1600s and runs all the way up to the Chinese nationalism. But my guess is that this piece probably was maybe 50 to 100 years old at least when he got it in 1910. So I think this is early 1800s. It's nicely done. The repair was actually done in a pretty reasonable way, so it does affect the value, but I don't think it destroys the value. I sold a piece I would consider similar to this in similar condition here in St. Petersburg for $125 about 6 months ago, and I think that's about where the value is. It would be a little more valuable if it didn't have the damage, but when you get back into the dynastic eras and these really old pieces, the collectors are a lot more forgiving of that as opposed to a piece that was made by a machine because they figure it's still handmade and it's got some one-of-a-kind aspects for that. And how did you get this one?
I married Wanda.
So it was a threefer. Okay, I got it.
It was some pieces that she has picked up. It was really quite recent, wasn't it?
Yes.
And very local.
And do you mind whispering or giving me the hindsight of what you paid for it, if you remember? Oh, very good. Again, she didn't pay a lot. This is a nice piece, and I'm always fascinated with the way that they're able to blow these into the piece in a way, because, you know, the glass is so hot. You would think it would stick to it and that it couldn't be done, and you can't take it out. No, the way it's made, it is in there permanently. I always found that kind of fascinating. I think what they do, actually, it's sort of like the ship in the bottle. I think what they do is they actually have a mold they blow it into, and they blow them all the same, and then they attach the frame and do the welds, and that's why it won't come out of the glass. Because if you tried to do these two things at the same time, they would explode and break. You couldn't do it. Most of this work that I see was done in Spain and that part of Europe in the late 1960s. Particularly, this was really popular. Although you see metalwork like this around even ceramics as far back as like the 1920s and 30s. So it's come and gone a couple of times, but you don't see it a lot because it's hard to do and it costs a lot of money. So I think this one is probably, my guess is about 1970. It has some evidence of wear. It's not brand new. It's also not old enough or heavy enough to be the 1920s version. I find it really likable, and when I've had pieces like this, I don't get them often, and usually I see pieces like this sell $75, $100. So again, the price she paid, which wasn't much, is not much at all. She did very well. And apparently you did very well too.
Yes, yeah. I did well.
Uh-oh, Wanda's got some, she was not gonna show us, but she's.
Okay.
But while we're here,
All right, we have one more piece. Oh, this is nice. And this is great. It wouldn't be an appraisal fair without seeing a really lovely old pocket watch. And this has a very nice case. How did you get this piece?
It was a gift for a birthday from his brother.
A birthday gift from your brother. Oh, that's very nice. He must have known you liked old things.
Well, he was a jeweler.
Oh, he was a watchmaker and a jeweler. Oh, how nice. Okay, the first thing that we're looking for is whether we can determine the material. It looks to me that this is real gold. Is that what he told you? Yeah, I thought so. I thought so, because usually when you open the back of a watch case, if it's a gold case, it doesn't say so, but if it says guaranteed or warranted, then it's plated, because that guarantee or warranty was for how many years the plating would last before it wore off. This particular one is an American Waltham. These were done in Connecticut, where a lot of watchmaking was done. It was there in Chicago. This is a lady's watch, and you notice that when you open it, it's sideways, and that way when you open the front of the watch, you can easily turn it and see what time it is. That's why it's mounted sideways rather than up and down. This particular one is going to date right about 1900 or shortly before.
It's 1883.
1883, okay, I'm sure that's right, because there's a really good book by Shergart that tells all of the dates and serial numbers. So since he was a jeweler, I'm sure he had access to that book. So 1883 it is, and that's pretty early for this kind of a wind, actually. Most watches until about this time were key wind. Now, does it run? Okay, I'm not going to bother winding it. We're going to take it at your word. The way that the case is done is very pretty. In the old days, you would buy the movement of the watch, and then you would pick the case you wanted. Price on pocket watches generally has come down a lot recently, because now nostalgia is for what Dad and Grandpa wore, and they wore wrist watches. But because this is gold, there's a lot of interest in it as a piece of jewelry, and I think that your value is probably in the 800 to 1200 range. Yes, this is a nice little piece. And have they ever talked to you about how they got it?
Probably my grandparents.
It probably is your grandparents, I would think, because on the bottom it's got a little mark. That little blue mark there says hand painted, and next to it is a little flower and the name Nippon underneath it. By the 19-teens, around World War I, we started really enforcing that if you wanted to import something to America, it had to have your country of origin on it, so that you couldn't just dump stuff anonymously and then destroy our businesses. We wanted to know where things came from. So this one is an early Nippon mark, and it should date between 1915 and about 1930. I like that it's got the hand-painted scenes on each side and the castle in this little cartouche. And then you've got a garland band of florals. Nippon was the most popular and collectible in the late 1980s, when the Japanese really were booming. As the Chinese started to take over more of the market and the Japanese market went flat, we don't see as many people collecting it as they used to, but it's still a really nice piece. I would say that it might value between $50 and $65. So 2 items here, and I think we'll go ahead and start with the magnifying glass. This piece here with the acanthus leaf is an old handle, probably to a parasol. And then this piece here, which is also old, is a magnifying glass, and you can see on the side there it's got birds and some little designs. This looks like aesthetic period in the United States. This probably dates back around to 1870, so this is rather old now. This is 150 years old. It's a true antique. I think the handle is interesting, and someone really did use it a lot. It's got a little chip here. It's got wear on the handle where it should from being held, and I think it's a really neat thing. I have had good luck selling these types of things too. There were a lot that were made of old parasol handles that were added to at later times, but this one appears to have been made this way right from the get-go. And I would say the value on this, based on what I got for the one I sold, might be as much as $150. They've really shot up quite a bit, especially for having the age that it does. The other piece here, this is Carnival Glass, and this is going to date to about 1910. It's got a nice drape pattern here, and I believe this one was made by Fenton Glass Company. It would have been one of the earliest things they did. There were other glass makers who did Carnival as well. It's called Carnival Glass because by the 1920s, they were starting to make depression glass, and depression glass was thinner. The color was in the glass. They didn't have to do all this work on it. And so a lot of the leftovers of these pieces ended up being sold in box lots to carnivals and given away as prizes. But they were not called Carnival Glass originally. They were actually trying to copy what Tiffany did. And so they're trying to look like precious metal. And this one has, when you talk about Carnival Glass, you talk about color. And the colors you talk about are two different colors. There's the color in the iridescence, the shiny part. The shiny part is put on after the glass has already been made. And so the first thing they do is they take the glass, they pour it in a mold, and they press this pattern. And that color is green in this case. They did them mostly in green or an orange color called marigold. You see less frequently aqua glass. Purple's fairly common, but you don't see aqua as much. You don't see ice blue very often or white very often. And generally red is really the scarcest of all, because red, you had to use gold to make red color back then, so it was more expensive. As far as the other color they refer to is in the iridescence. And so you look for this rainbow effect. So this one has gold, it has green, it has a little bit of purple. It shades very nicely to a lot of the different colors that you get in the spectrum. It's just really on the surface, so that's why you should never use a harsh scrubber or Windex or anything like that on old Carnival glass, because you can take that color off. Fortunately, no one ever did this with this. It's in very good condition. It's a relatively common piece, so the value is in the $30 range, but it's very pretty.
I
He found the pin that went with the
Oh, that's great. Oh, how neat.
That was from the Olympics that was canceled because of World War II.
Yes, that's right. I remember you showed us this.
I remember the price from you. My dad was stationed in London, and he bought that, and then with World War II, they canceled everything.
Yes, it's such a great piece, and I remember thinking how interesting this was when you showed me, and now to see that you have a pin that goes with it. It's really interesting to me that he also got this little pin, and the way that it's got the pin on the back, it looks like it's a hat badge of some sort, or maybe a clothing pin, almost for a uniform. Do you have any idea how he picked up these pieces?
No, he was stationed with the Red Cross in London, England, and I don't know.
So now instead of the one piece that we saw last year, now we have two. And that brings us into what they call collection effect. The person who is interested in the Olympics and in the canceled Olympics, that is a very interesting story that gives this so much value, would be really happy to have both of these pieces. And so if you had the two of them together, now I think I told you I thought the little banner might be worth $200 or $225. The pin by itself, it is sterling. It's got the mark on it, and you can see the little bar that it would have clipped in with on the back. I think you might see a value of maybe as much as $350. He ended up preserving a rather interesting and somewhat noteworthy piece of history here. Now, if you notice, I'm folding it back a different direction than it was folded, and this is important too. If you folks have old linens or quilts that you're preserving, family things, it's important to turn them and fold them a different direction once in a while. Maybe like with your, when you're supposed to change your smoke detector battery on your birthday, and then 6 months later every year. It's kind of good to refold your linens about that often too, so the creases don't become permanent. But that's a really neat thing. I'm so glad that you brought us the other piece. That's really cool.
Those are the last year they printed the Wishbook.
Yeah, these are the old Sears Wishbooks, the old Sears catalogs.
I worked 35 years for them.
Oh, that's great. And I'm glad that you preserved these. I see one is Holiday 2000, and you can see the difference. This is 1992, this is 2000. Sears was definitely having some trouble by the time the last one came out. But
just to look through there.
They're so much fun to look through, and the thing is that old catalogs, especially Sears, but also Montgomery Ward's, and really old catalogs for anything, are actually collectible and have value now. And part of the reason for that is that this is back in the days when there was still mail order. Now everything is on the computer. It comes in a box. You don't even go to the store, and then a lot of the Sears stores aren't around anymore. So there is an active collector market for these, partly because they like to look at the old stuff and see what things cost. We've got pool tables for $800 to $1,300 there. Here we have Cabbage Patch Kids, and they're $32 each. And Cabbage Patch Kids were a big deal in the 1980s especially. Your daughter still has hers? Yeah, a lot of people are collecting Cabbage Patch now. And this, it's funny to see, it was $32.99 with the two-way radio, so you could talk to your friend or your brother or sister in the other room. The Cabbage Patch doll that it's advertising is probably $50 or $75 now. That's part of the reason people like these old catalogs. Also, a lot of the resellers like these because they can go through the catalogs and have an idea of what was out on the market that maybe they want to be looking for now. So in a strange way, the Wishbook of old has become the antique and vintage reseller's Wishbook of new. And I pick them up when I see them, and I particularly pick up the older ones. I just got one that's a 1939 Sears catalog, and it's great fun to look through and see what they were selling then. This era, they're probably selling for about $20 a piece. If you get back to older catalogs that are maybe more from the, 1930s, 40s era, they're selling for about $50 to $75 a piece. And if you can get way back to the original Sears and Ward's catalogs from the late 1800s, those are selling for $150 and $200 a piece. So if you haven't thrown all your old catalogs away, there might actually be value in them.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was fun. Well, Coronation Plates are another area. Unfortunately, the royal family has had some problems lately, you may have noticed. And because of that, the Coronation Plates are a little bit of a slow seller again. I still like them. I still pick them up. I saw one recently that was the royal visit to Canada from 1939. I think they wanted $20 for it. No, the prices are really down. I just sold a bottle recently from the 1911 coronation of King George V and Queen Mary, and it should have gotten $65, and it didn't actually get as much as that. And I remember when that was a $100 piece. Again, the thing that will change that is that even though they're having a lot of difficulties and maybe some people have become soured by the royal family, there will be a change at some point in the not too distant future. We'll have a new king that will renew interest, and he will be up in age as well by the time he gets there, which means then the generation that are in their 30s now will be, or 40s now, will be taking over. And I think that will start to get a bunch of younger people interested in it. I mean, for whatever you might think of Meghan Markle and her war with the royal family, she's certainly drawn a lot of attention to the royal family in America. And I think that sort of thing is what will eventually push the market back up. But it's terrible to say this because long live the Queen, but when Queen Elizabeth is gone, I think we'll see a resurgence in collecting royalty memorabilia. Well, thank you folks very much. It was a pleasure to see you, and I hope to see you again. Thank you very much for joining. I'm George the Antique Nomad. Check me out at the social media and links in the description you'll see below, and we'll see you again for more fun from another place in the antique and vintage world soon. Thanks for joining me again in the fun and fascinating antique community, here where online meets the real world. Please click the subscribe button below, click the bell to be notified when new videos upload, leave a comment below, and hit thumbs up to like this video. Links to our online social media and our items for sale are in the description. This is George at the Antique Nomad. Bye for now.